Good morning and welcome back again. Thank you so much for joining us for this Presidential Candidate Forum on the health and growth of the U.S. economy. It is now my pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, to please welcome Governor Deval Patrick and moderator Dave Solomon.
That's good. All right. Hi, everybody.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you. Over this way. Great.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you. Can we sit?
Yep.
To begin our program, I would now like to introduce Mary Kling and our hostess, the president of Nashua Community College, Lucille Jordan.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Lucille Jordan, president of Nashua Community College, and I'm thrilled to welcome all of you to our campus today. NCC has been part of the greater higher education landscape for actually it's our 50th anniversary over 5 decades. Today we serve more than 2,000 students a year, and we have a talented group of faculty and staff who contribute greatly to the quality of life in New Hampshire. It's an honor to host today's forum brought to you by the Community College System of New Hampshire, the Union Leader, and Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses. As a host group, we represent elements of what gives New Hampshire its unique character: an engaged press, an agile and innovative educational system, and support to small businesses. New Hampshire is known, in fact, for its small business community. Our business owners are talented and an entrepreneurial group of people who are making a real difference in the Granite State. One of whom is Mary Kling, is here with us today to illustrate the impact of small businesses and of the 10,000 Small Business Program. Mary owns Wendy's Cleaning Service, and she will tell you a little bit about her story and why attention to the concerns of educators and small business owners is important in this election. It is my pleasure to now introduce Mary Kling. Mary?
Thank you, President Jordan. Okay, I'm nervous. Okay, so good morning, everyone. My name is Mary Kling. I own Wendy's Cleaning Service. We provide residential and commercial cleaning to the Sahegan Valley. So my journey began in 2000 when my sister Grace had her first fight with breast cancer. So to stay close, I got a job at Wendy's Cleaning Service so I could be there for her. Grace beat that bout of cancer, and what we realized is we wanted to do something together. So Grace came up with the great idea of buying Wendy's Cleaning Service. I knew it was a solid business with potential, so I bought it, and we went for it. Grace didn't win her second fight with breast cancer, and she died in 2015. And she left me alone to run a small business. I struggled for a few years, but I knew I needed a plan. In September of 2018, I came across the article about Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses. I applied and was accepted, and it was a complete game changer for me. Since graduating the program in May of 2019, we have consistently grown our revenue by 25%. I have now a succession plan in place. So the program made sure that I had the tools and strategies in place to not only stay in business, but to prosper and grow. Also, most importantly, the program gave me the community of peers and also confidence that I could lean on. As small business owners, we don't give our collective power. We don't think about our collective power, and that's a big mistake. We put ourselves on the line every day. We provide valuable services and products, we create jobs, and we strengthen our local community. I am proud of what I and other small businesses do in New Hampshire, and I want to thank Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses, the Community College System of New Hampshire, for hosting today's forum to focus on the issues that impact small businesses and our country. And I want to thank Governor Patrick for being here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Indeed, thank you very much for being with us today, Governor. We truly appreciate it. And as you know, this focus of these forums is on the economy, as it is hosted by Goldman Sachs, and many of the attendees are in their small business education program. Others are students, others are members of the general public.
Who are here now. Excellent. Great.
Oh, I'm sorry?
That's okay. Please go forward.
Okay. Okay, I did.
You missed your cue, I think is what he's telling you.
Okay, more remarks. I thought we had those.
Well, first, I'd like to thank
That's good.
Mary. I think her story is one that reflects many of the businesses that we currently work with, and I will turn it over to you momentarily.
Take your time.
And David will certainly ask questions and facilitate questions from the audience with Governor Patrick. And I personally would like to thank all of you in advance for being a great audience in the tradition of New Hampshire's first in the nation primary. And now it's all yours.
That's it? Okay, I was just, I don't know. I was just awfully anxious to get the interview underway.
Thank you.
I was listening to you on NHPR radio on the exchange on the way in.
How'd it go?
I thought you did a good job.
Thank
You were very strong on making the point that from your perspective, relative to the economy, that businesses, particularly in recent years, have become way too focused on the short term,
Right.
without enough of a long term.
Well, so is politics and government.
Just as we are in many
Right.
other aspects of
Right.
life, and that they have also lost focus on, or have focused too much on a narrow perspective of who the businesses are designed to serve and who should benefit from their success. Could you elaborate on that for us, why you think we got to that state, and what power the president has as a policymaker and chief executive to change that dynamic?
It's so interesting. Both of those questions are interesting. The second one is harder, but I have a point of view about that. And what we're talking about is, for everybody else, is a concern I have had since my last run past two in business, where particularly larger public companies, where there's this pressure to get next quarter's results.
Right.
I think sometimes not always fully mindful of the long-term interests of the enterprise. And I think that same bad habit has crept into the way we govern. We govern from news cycle to news cycle, or election cycle to election cycle, not generation to generation. And there are decisions we have to make right now, big, hard decisions that will make a difference for a generation. They may not come to fruition in time to take a bow at the next election, but they matter, and they are what government is supposed to be about. And that's, frankly, a big part of how I thought about running for governor in the first place. That I wanted, and this may be an answer to the second question, I wanted to model something different, that we had strong convictions. We were willing to not just accumulate political capital, but actually spend it, because that's what it was going to take to make some big changes. And I think about healthcare, I think about pension reform, I think about transportation investments and some of the reorgs that we did, and doing all of that, investing in the schools, not just money but time and ideas. And all of that at a time when the bottom had fallen out of the global economy, made it doubly challenging. But we were real clear about where we were going, and I think we have a lot of great bragging points today.
This short-term focus that you allude to, and the damaging effect it's had on the economy, it stems in large part from the reward systems that are in place, right? People behave in the ways that they're rewarded, and business leaders have been aggressively rewarded for short-term results, not long-term gains. Is that something that can really be changed by the political apparatus?
So I think it was changed to that in many respects by political leadership.
Okay.
So, I'm a capitalist. I'm not a market fundamentalist, right? I don't believe markets solve every problem. I'm not that kind of capitalist. And I'm certainly not one of these people who says, for every social problem, a business person should be in charge of it, because frankly, being a public executive is different.
Right.
But I think that capitalism has a lot to answer for, because we've been on this kind of, hoarding all the benefits in the business leadership on the theory that it would trickle down to everybody else since 1980. And, it's so interesting. The Dow Jones is not actually an economic indicator, but since Ronald Reagan, we've been talking about it as if it were. And so we had capitalism before 1980, but the concentration on getting short-term returns and windfalls and all that exploded, has exploded since 1980, and I think the data will show that. And so I think that one thing a president can do, and that I would like to do as president, is model a different kind of narrative and behavior about long-term value. And it's an old-fashioned idea, that I think every one of us learned from our grandparents. We're supposed to do what we can in our time to leave things better for those who come behind us. And sometimes that means you have to share sacrifice so that you leave something better.
What could you specifically do, though, as president, to shift the reward system that drives our financial industry to one that favors long-term?
So one of the reasons why, in fact, the thing that I did at Bain Capital after I left after 2 terms was to create a business to invest in businesses for both social and environmental impact, measurable social and environmental impact. And I wanted to do this, and I can get into why I wanted to do it there. But I wanted to do something that where we could demonstrate that trading return for impact was a false choice all along, which is what I have believed. And so we invested in middle market companies in North America, where we could generate a return in 3 sort of thematics: sustainability, health and wellness, and workforce development. And so think of a company, for example, that diverts green waste from landfills, where it would otherwise create methane gas, a huge greenhouse gas problem, and instead recycles it and sells it as recycled soils and ground covers. Or a company that was delivering high-quality, low-cost dental care to poor kids, which is a big gap in our healthcare system, and doing it in a scalable way. And there were companies like that, and there are lots of them, actually driven, I think, by a changing sensibility among many consumers who are saying, look, I want to eat differently, I want to wear clothes that have a different kind of, as they say, provenance. You know where they come from, where they're made, and how they're made. We want to be more sensitive to our own impact on the environment. That's creating markets, right? And there are companies built off of those markets, and they need capital to scale as well. And I'm very proud of the fact that we were able to demonstrate we could get highly competitive returns investing in companies like that, which kind of goes right at the rationale for the short-termism that has been such a big part of business.
Those kind of market changes can have dramatic effect, I suppose. That's what we'd be hoping for. You point out that the stock market is not the economy, and the economy is not the stock market, as we often hear. But it is roaring, and that has a positive effect on consumer psychology in some ways. And there are many other very positive indicators in the economy. We're going to get a good jobs report, or probably have by now.
I think we did earlier today.
And so is the economy really a strong point for Democratic candidates like yourself to run against the incumbent president on? Isn't it working in his favor?
Well, I think the economic indicators are cheery, but they don't tell the whole story. Inflation is low as long as you don't count the cost of education, healthcare, housing, right? The very things that enable people to stabilize themselves and get on a path of economic mobility. The same is true of unemployment. It's low as long as you count both or all 3 of the minimum wage jobs people have to survive. That is a reality. It's not everybody's reality, but it's a big enough challenge. We all ought to care about it, and frankly, I want to be the sort of president who sees everybody, everywhere. The folks who are enjoying the American dream and are benefiting from the American dream the way I have been so blessed to do. But there are a whole lot of folks, and there were all along on the south side of Chicago where I grew up, but now in many more places, who find the American dream hard to imagine, hard to believe in. Because what it takes to get on that path of economic mobility is harder and harder. it's further and further out of reach. And I think there are things, I totally get that my own journey and the journey of others on similar paths of trying to reach for their dreams has a factor that is about grit and determination and personal responsibility. I totally get that. But my dream was also made possible by access to great education, right? And housing and health care that I could afford, and a place in the economy for me when I was ready for it.
Right.
And so the notion that public policy has a role in that is very clear from my own life experience, and it's been clear from my business and governmental experience. And I think there's some things government can do today to make the American dream truly accessible to everyone everywhere.
It is, as you said, the path toward it has become longer and more difficult. The economy is very strong. If you're fortunate enough to have a degree or graduate degree in health, finance, technology, not everybody's suited to that.
That's right.
And a big source of the anger and economic frustration we experience is a large part of it is centered on working class people who grew up with jobs that were fairly prosperous for them,
right.
that didn't require extensive degrees in education.
Right.
And
one job was enough.
one job was enough.
Right.
So what do you have for that person? What can you, what can public policy offer to that high school educated, middle class manufacturing employee
yes.
who looks at the lifestyle their father had and thought
yes.
they were going to have the same thing, and that's being denied to them?
So I think the first thing I think that has to be admitted is that, for example, in manufacturing, today's factory is just not like yesterday. It's not like Dad's, and I'm being advisable when I say Dad's, because
right.
that's mostly who was in that factory. But I think if I take a step back, the so-called innovation economy or the knowledge economy, right. which is what the global economy is becoming, that has been a source of disruption and therefore fear for a lot of people. We can own that in this country. We can master that. That is an opportunity. And I think when you think about the historical sort of mojo that America has had in innovation, we're pretty good at that. We're not so good at transition, which is to say we go to the next thing and we get around to the consequences of that, if at all, later. This is a way and a time to think about how we bring people along and make them a part. So as I think about that strategy, and what we lay out is something called the opportunity agenda, it's about investing in education, in innovation, and in infrastructure. And I talk about them as agenda rather than a policy silo, because I don't think most people live in the world of policy silos. They live at the intersection. You know, you can be a terrific small business in Sahegan Valley, or did I say it right?
Yeah.
Sahegan Valley, or let's suppose way up north in the North Country. Mm-hmm. Terrific business, enjoying the global economy, unless you don't have access to broadband, right? And then it doesn't work, right? Infrastructure has to be connected. The life sciences supercluster in Massachusetts is on fire. That wasn't by accident. A lot of people think that is just about folks in long white coats, right, with PhDs. There are all kinds of needs right through and out in terms of workforce needs, lab technicians and so on, terrific so-called middle skills jobs, but not if the housing is unaffordable where those jobs are. So how do we think about investing in workforce housing? How do we think about investing in transportation so that you could get to a place that had more affordable housing and still have access to that work? There's a way to do this that is about long-term investment and long-term planning that makes the American dream actually within reach of everybody everywhere, and that's what we have to be about. And I think it's quite exciting. I know I'm going on, but just on the, I'm very, I think in the long panoply of false choices that we get in politics, this notion that we can't, that you have to wreck the economy in order to have a carbon-free future is absurd.
Right.
But if you're in coal country, you feel deeply threatened by the idea of a carbon-free future, quite naturally, right? A community that's also already wobbly economically. But nobody goes to coal country, and you know, in fairness, neither have I yet, but goes to coal country and says, you know what, look, the Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stone. We got a better idea. We got a better idea today. And how about you be a part of it? Here's, you know, you take the wind blade development part of it. And that's the next thing. This is my point about transition, how we are intentional about spreading the opportunity of owning the knowledge economy, leading the innovation economy here in the United States, how we spread that out from centers like Boston or San Francisco.
Okay. Well, we're creating the kind of pathways for participation in the new economy by people who may have been left behind is going to require some investment of government resources to create the wraparound services you described, affordable housing, transportation, training options, and so forth. So
where's the money coming from?
Where's that going to come from? Where are you going to cut to create that, or where are you going to tax?
Well, first of all, I think let me talk about revenue and then talk about things. First of all, I think Democrats in particular, we need to get over. Actually, maybe I won't pick on Democrats. All of us need to get over this notion of tax as a penalty. Tax is the price of civilization, and it's a perfectly appropriate, in fact, important question to ask what we want government to do and not do. But we should start there and then ask ourselves what it actually costs and what is the most equitable way to raise revenue for that. On the revenue side, my view is we need a radically simpler personal income tax code than we have today. We should treat all income as income. Whether it's carried interest, which is a big deal in private equity, where I most recently work, or other investment income, or just wages. Just treat it all the same. Let's have three progressive brackets, and let's eliminate all or most of the deductions. I mean, keep the mortgage deduction, maybe the charitable deduction, but most of it you can just simplify. You get so much by simplification. Same is true on the corporate side. The consensus in the business community was that the rate should be reduced for competitive reasons to 25. It was the administration's idea to go all the way to 20 or 21, wherever it was. It can come back up to 25 and rattle nobody, but then we have to finish the work and eliminate the loopholes, because we have some of the most profitable companies in the world paying zero in federal taxes. I don't support the wealth tax, not because its objectives are wrong, but wealth isn't the problem, it's greed. It's greed. We want aspiration. And what I do instead is increase the estate tax. It was 55%, I think, the cut before last. So there are some ideas. And then I think on the cutting side, my friend Ray Mabus who was the Secretary of Navy in the last administration, told me that the biggest line item in the Navy is what?
The biggest line item?
Take a guess, anybody. Healthcare. Healthcare. It's not the weapon systems, it's not the ships, it's healthcare.
Every business.
But you see, this is what I mean by the intersection of policy. We have to do more than one thing at a time in order to get this thing right-sized and right-focused, this thing meaning our country, so that we can be about leaving things materially better for those who come behind us.
So you talk about the three tiers of tax rate progressive, and the top one would be on the highest earners, so I guess that would be a wealth tax of some sort, but we've always had progressive taxation in that fashion. The question has arisen in the campaign by many candidates regarding what's called passive income, income from investments, income you didn't earn from work. But, and you were an investment advisor. Goldman Sachs here specializes in helping people live off their investments. Do you think investment income should be taxed at the same rate as?
Well, I just said I think we should. I hope Goldman doesn't snatch the seat out from under me for saying it. But I think in the interest of simplification, income's income.
Okay.
Let's just do it that way. And we can have a conversation about what the rates ought to be. But as I said earlier, let's start with the conversation about what it is we want government to do and not do.
All right, well, let's start the conversation with some of our attendees here. 20 minutes into the program. That's usually when we open the floor to a couple questioners.
Somebody's ready to go. Yes,
First
sir.
up, we have
Hi.
Tom.
Tom?
Would you state your full name, your town,
I'm
Tom, and
Tom
your question?
Alcier, and I live in Hudson, New Hampshire.
Yes, sir.
The Commonwealth of Massachusetts has the power through the governor and the general court to wipe out all the zoning restrictions imposed by all the cities and towns, which would immediately release an abundance of new jobs in demolition and construction, followed by a glut of new housing meeting the modern code and forcing landlords to lower their rents. Families without a car would not have to pay for the parking lot, and people could live closer to work. They could just walk down the street to work. What did you do as governor to abolish all the zoning restrictions?
Well, your premise, your model is right, but your premise is wrong. With due respect, Tom. The governor doesn't get to just blow up all the local zoning laws, tempting though that sometimes was. It was much more a negotiation. And we tried to focus on what was called transit-oriented housing, so density close to transportation, for some of the reasons you said, that folks don't want to have a car. It's cheaper without a car. It's frankly easier on downtown Boston, for example, not to have a car. We also tried to focus on investing in transportation to get to places where there was a workforce who'd been cut off. For example, South Coast Rail, I don't know if you know the geography of Massachusetts much, but think of the South Coast as New Bedford, Fall River. There was an old rail bed there that was discontinued, a long, long time ago. And it has effectively cut off workers in that part of the Commonwealth to job opportunities in or closer to Boston. It's also cut off people in Boston to very affordable housing at the end. And folks have been promising this for forever. We made huge progress, but we didn't finish it. And you talk about permitting. There's one where it'd be very tempting, because there were lots of local permitting issues that made that project go slowly. Big one, as a counter example, we invested in the rail bed out to Worcester, and the frequency of the service to Worcester, and that has contributed. I don't know if you've been out to Worcester lately. That's contributed to an explosion of the city of Worcester. So to your point, there are a lot of interconnecting policies, but simply being able to wipe aside all of the local ordinances in a grand gesture, tempting, but
I think a lot of that. There's a lot of arguments being made, right here in New Hampshire in particular, that the nature of the local zoning, the exclusionary nature of many local zoning ordinances, is a big contributor to the affordable housing.
I think that's what Tom is getting at.
Point,
exactly. Yeah.
And the economy is suffering because people can't get workers. They can't get workers because the workers can't find places to live.
Yep.
And
so I was in Charleston, South Carolina. I've been basically coming between New Hampshire and South Carolina since the campaign began. And Charleston has become, and we should talk about the impact of climate change there, but it has become a sort of a hip destination for a lot of people. And the cost of housing until recently would have struck us from up here as quite affordable. Lot of tourists now and so forth. And the tourist industry is booming. But if you work in the tourist industry in the service part of the tourism, you can't afford to live in Charleston anymore for exactly these reasons.
We have a lot of the same problems around here, of course. All right, we have another question from one of our attendees. Jonathan is on this side. Well, just introduce yourself, say where you're from.
Hey, Governor Patrick.
How are you?
Nice to be here, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So my question was kind of on climate change and the impact it has on the economy.
Yes.
Like, how important to you is climate change and the part it plays on our economy? do you feel like we could create a lot of like new green jobs, still keeping the economy healthy, but like also taking care of some kind of issues caused by the current economy?
Yeah, so this is, I mentioned earlier to David this notion of false choices were peddled. You know, I'm a Democrat. I don't think you have to hate Republicans to be a good Democrat. I don't think you have to hate business to be a social justice warrior or hate the police to believe Black Lives Matter. You know, we get all these false choices. And one of them is that we can't have a clean, green economy without wrecking the economy. A clean, green future, that is, without wrecking the economy. I just don't believe it. We joined RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, in the first few days of my first term in office, and we used the proceeds from the auctions. This is a regional cap and trade system, you probably know. We used the proceeds of the auction to invest in energy efficiency. Also created a lot of jobs, a lot of opportunity, particularly among working people and poor people. Through that, we closed the last 2 coal-fired power plants because we were generating sufficient alternatives through solar and wind, and also energy efficiency, which is the most efficient first spend to get us to a cleaner future. We have a statewide plan for resilience and recovery, and we invested some behind that as well. Seawalls, for example, is obviously tailored differently for different parts of the state, and the clean tech jobs were one of the sectors that helped us come out of recession faster than most other states, to a 25-year employment high. So yes is the answer. We can have a clean, green future and a thriving economy, provided, and this is the point I was making earlier, that innovation is mindful of transition, so that we're thinking about how the jobs are created, who has access to those jobs, how we prepare people to take advantage of of those opportunities, instead of, having it be an afterthought.
Right. A lot of the same people who feel very strongly about green energy and climate change and separating ourselves from reliance on fossil fuels also oppose nuclear power. Do you see an inherent contradiction in there?
No, I don't. I mean, look, nuclear power makes me nervous too, because we haven't figured out the waste disposal. Right. And I get that it counts as carbon-free. I was going to say green, but carbon-free. I get that part. We had how many hundreds of years does it take before the waste rods are safe to handle, if then? And nationally, we haven't sorted that out. By the way, try bringing up Yucca Mountain when you're in Nevada.
The repository. Yeah. Dumping ground for nuclear waste.
And they won't have it.
Nobody wants it.
So, you can perfectly understand why.
Okay. Well, it's a change that's going to have to be made with no easy or cheap solutions.
No, but you know what? It's we have undertaken big transformative lifts nationally without knowing exactly what the end game was going to be, but we knew that it was important to get there, and we pulled together nationally to do it. Yeah. And I think we can do this here. And the question about the importance of climate change, which I didn't really answer, if we don't get this right, everything else we're talking about, vanishes. Yeah. So I'm just simply saying we need not be afraid of this. We should embrace this as a challenge, and frankly, to build our muscle memory around how we innovate and transition.
Right. We have tackled these big challenges in the past. As you alluded to, we were united in tackling them in many ways, putting a man on the moon and so forth. Tackling this challenge is going to require the same type of unity, but is that even possible in our polarized culture today?
Of course.
To achieve the unity necessary to address this problem?
I think we're hungry for unity. I think that we are I think there are many, many more folks who are ready for that unity and tired of our outrage culture than we give credit.
Okay.
And I think, I want to be the sort of leader who calls that out. I've had, never on the scale of the president, but, we had all the elements when the bombs went off at the marathon for chaos and fear. And into that often comes division. But we'd had some practice in those 8 years before of turning to each other rather than on each other. And we called on that, and I think we came out of that stronger than we were before.
That's great. We have another question from the audience. Doug, are you with us? Just state your name and where you're from.
My name is Douglas Dell from Merrimack, New Hampshire,
Hi, Douglas.
and I'm a volunteer with AARP New Hampshire.
Excellent.
You probably know what question's coming. Governor, if you're elected president, what is the first thing you will do to lower prescription drug prices?
This is on everybody's mind. So interesting. Thank you for the question. Do I need to repeat the question, by the way, for the recordings or anything? Are you getting all that?
Fine.
You got it. Okay. It's interesting to me, not just in the abstract, because you'll hear from some 15% of total healthcare costs represent drug costs, a small part of it, but it's the part that touches you, right? And when you see the kinds of abuses, was it insulin? Am I right? Where the
Jacked up the price.
they jacked up and it was by then a generic, I think. It's just unconscionable. We have a system here where a lot of the investment that happens in drug development is done privately. That wasn't always true. We used to do much more basic research through government than we do today. We've been draining the NSF and the NIH of those dollars over time, and so more of it has happened on the public side, and so the pressure to get a big return in the short term is greater today than it used to be. The other thing that's happening is that the capital is raised mainly, not exclusively, in North America, but the costs so the return is focused on North America instead of the base being spread on a world or a global market the way it should be. And there's something in the combination of those two things which gets drug prices down over time. In the short run, permitting government to negotiate across those different markets is critical. And there was a carve-out in a bill, I don't know, a while ago, that prevented government from, for example, negotiating prices for the same drugs between the markets in the United States and Canada or Europe. Same drug, different market, different price in different place. Well, if we believe markets help in any respect, well, then open the market and go get the best price wherever the drug is offered, and that will enabling a big buyer like the federal government to do that changes a whole lot quickly.
Yeah. When under President Bush the second, Congress added prescription drugs to Medicare coverage, basically telling the prescription drug industry, big new pot of money here for you in Medicare, and in the same stroke, forbid the government from negotiate the pricing.
Which is insane. Right.
Well, what could you say as a president you could do to prevent that kind of thing when it wasn't prevented then, and attempts by the Obama administration to change it failed even when they had 60 votes in the Senate?
Well, this is the point. You can't do this by yourself. You have to get the Congress to come along. Frankly, the pressure because of AARP and others in raising this as a real issue people are dealing with in their lives has been growing, and that's important. But we have something announced just today, actually, called the Democracy Agenda, which is about getting at all the different ways we have treated our democracy as if it could tolerate limitless abuse without breaking. The amount of money, much of it dark, in our politics today, the influence of lobbyists, particularly corporate lobbyists who are protecting their interests at the expense of regular people. And by the way, the combination of limitless money in politics and the influence of lobbyists is the reason lobbyists get paid attention to more than grassroots advocates, or have an undue weight in the process, I think is probably what I want to say. The hyperpartisan gerrymandering, the vote suppression, and purging, all of these things together conspire to make it so that our democracy doesn't always, and in some people's views, often produce democratic outcomes. So the first thing I'm interested in is moving that democracy agenda, because it makes some of the big system changes that we're talking about that much easier.
We are in need of some big system changes in Social Security and Medicare, as our friends here from the ARP would attest. That's a big initiative of theirs. It's a large percentage of seniors rely heavily on Social Security for their income. That's money that's poured back into the economy.
Right.
On purchased goods and services, and the numbers don't lie. There's a point coming in 2035 when the revenue is just not going to be there to meet the promises that have been made, and nobody is doing anything about it. It's not even that big of a topic on the campaign trail.
It's interesting. It's not a very big topic on the campaign trail. I think it will be in the general, but it hasn't been in the primary. You're right. AARP actually has some pretty good proposals on helping Social Security.
Which one of them do you like?
Be sustainable. I'm not sure, because I haven't done all my homework yet. I think, look, I am committed to the sustainability of Social Security. I think we have to be. Frankly, it's your money. I mean, you paid into it. So the notion that we're going to raid it for other things seems...
There won't be any rating. They'll just come to a point where either the benefits are going to have to be cut or the taxes are going to be raised.
Well,
nothing's done beforehand.
I think there are also questions about whether the super fortunate should have access.
That's the means testing. That's
exactly.
Another one of the proposals that's been floated.
Exactly. So it's someone described it to me. This is a math problem. We're going to have to figure out what math is right.
Okay.
But ignoring it, I take your point, is a gap in the Democratic primary so far.
Interesting. Well, there's not. Go ahead. What's your name?
Chuck Weinstein. I have a question.
Hi, Chuck.
Hi. Delighted that I'm allowed to ask it. I just want to tie some threads together, if I could. Hopefully, soon to be President Patrick. Hopefully.
Thank you. He is not a plant.
I'm not a bush. I'm not a bush either. But I am from Massachusetts. I'm from Arlington.
Excellent.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Tie some threads. One is healthcare costs. May I suggest the medication piece of the healthcare is very, very significant. Billions of dollars for medication.
Yes.
My field is in substance use treatment and care, as well as counseling, and there's some very cool ideas going on. In Massachusetts, I think a certain percentage of the Department of Mental Health's annual budget is given to people with mental health issues to use as they see fit. I have so much to say, but would you consider this type of idea of empowering people that receive care?
Yes.
Patients, people with substance use issues, people with mental health issues,
yes.
To be hired to do jobs as in support of other people with mental health
in
issues.
Service of the community. Yeah.
This would create jobs, workforce development.
Yep.
And the other thing that is outside of the box is to consider people who are actively using substances. They're not bad people. They're good people. In fact, they're our neighbors. Could we not create some type of workforce development for people who are using drugs if they are given an incentive versus a disincentive to getting better or to making their life helpful? Could that be something to think about as far as the Health and Human Services end of your platform, to bring people in, not just professionals who have been in the field, but tap into resources.
Don't just keep it up here, but bring in.
It down to the people who are actually receiving services and asking them, what do you need and how can we provide it? Take the stigma away from people who are using substances. Instead, look at them as an untapped resource for intelligence and as a workforce.
All right.
Your thoughts on that? Thank you so much.
Wow. Tell me your first name again.
Chuck.
Chuck. So many things come to mind from your comments and your question. First of all, removing the stigmas. You say so many of the people who are dealing with substance use disorders of one kind or another are nice people, as you say. Look, when I was growing up, my uncle was one of those relatives in our house, and he was using heroin in our home. And he was a nice guy when he was straight, and he couldn't break his habit. And he, frankly, like an awful lot of people today, could not get sustained access to service. You know, he could go to a program for a little bit, but not enough to help him deal with his own issues. And his own issues were not limited to being sober. Right? There was a whole wraparound and in a way, kind of a retraining or reprogramming about how to be on your own and a part of responsible society. And work, soft and hard skills, is a part of that. For some, not everybody, but for some who are dealing with similar issues, being in service of others who are trying to break their addiction is hugely powerful. But the discipline of work is enormously important, no matter whatever the setting. I think this similarly with you mentioned mental health. You know, we must think of mental health as a part and a complete part of healthcare reform. We have to, and I say that not just as someone whose wife has managed anxiety and depression issues for her whole adult life, but I think the number is something like 1 in 5 now. You talked about addiction being in our neighborhood. So is depression and anxiety. I met a woman who who leads a K-12 school here in New Hampshire a couple weeks ago, and she told me that the biggest issue in school is the anxiety and depression of those children who are worried about climate change and a whole host of issues that are beyond they felt their control. So bringing that also out of the shadows and making it a central part of how we think about policy, and bringing the community into the conversation so that the solutions actually matter, I think, where they should, where they touch people, absolutely critical. So I'm totally open to it. I don't have a plan to offer you that is just that.
Offer you a plan.
Thank you. That'd be great.
And also, may I please say that I've lived through an addiction myself, and I've come through it. It's not a linear process.
That's right.
And people who haven't been in an addiction really don't understand
That's
it.
right.
Even the people that teach about it,
Yep.
You've got to have it to understand it. And also, I live with persistent mental health issues, and I've had that since I was 7 years old. I have been successful because of supports of my family, the community, and organizations. So it takes a village. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for bringing that up, because
going,
it's a
Chuck.
big part of, in New Hampshire in particular, the effect of the opioid epidemic has been extreme, and it's had significant impact on the economy and huge costs to employers, families, and others. So I'm glad that point came up. It's as relevant to the economy as many others, or any others. Let's turn to trade, if we can. And I'm curious about your perspective on this great divide. Which do you think is better for the economy? A trade policy that's fairly open, resulting in lower priced consumer goods, or restrictive trade barriers that raise the price of consumer goods but save jobs in certain sectors of the economy?
Well, I don't think this is another one of those binary things that I don't think quite works. I do think we are in a global market, and we should participate in that global market. But in this area, like in others, I think we should make policy consistent with our values, which is to say we shouldn't We shouldn't be doing deals that don't take account of our human rights, worker rights, environmental stewardship. We should just sort of sell that on because we can get a cheaper flat screen TV. At the same time, I think more and more of our economy, this is back to my point earlier, we should be owning this innovation economy. The biggest challenge we face right now, or a big challenge we face right now, is the so-called middle skills gap. So, and I kind of confronted this, I think, in very clear terms in office when we had 175,000 people looking for work at the height of the recession in Massachusetts, and at the same time 125,000 vacancies. Think about that.
Mismatch.
And the employers were telling us that they couldn't find people with the skills necessary for the jobs they had. And the training dollars that come from the federal government are completely inflexible. You can't say, well, here's an employer who has this kind of need, and here are some folks over here who have a need for a job, and these basic skills, how about we turn the training dollars so that they match those people with those specific jobs instead of just programs where you train and hope. And you can't do that. That's not the whole fix, but that's a pretty straightforward one. And I think that we have to, when I said earlier, today's factory is not yesterday's, it doesn't mean that we're not seeing manufacturing grow. But the lathe I used to operate, now you have to know how to code to run that lathe. That doesn't mean you have to be, 17 to learn how to code. You can learn how to code later in life, but this is my point. We do transition. We do innovation, and we get around to transition later on. Let's bring people with us. So I think there is a place for global markets, and I think there is a place for us in that global market, us meaning the United States, to produce the high margin things. That a place of knowledge concentration and an emphasis on education, not just PhDs, can produce, and that's going to be our secret sauce going forward. Our
secret sauce is the intellectual property. You're saying the higher end value added.
Correct, but it's not. And I want to be clear. This is not just the PhDs. Right through that so-called value chain are opportunities for our own people, folks today who have or are getting those PhDs and so on, but also the so-called middle skills where you need more than a high school diploma in most cases, but not necessarily a college degree. You need targeted training, in many cases certifications. And they can make a huge difference in your standard of living and your ability to stabilize yourself and your family.
And community colleges like the one we're here at.
So I didn't know if it was okay to just come out and make a plug, but frankly, the community college, the president and I were talking about this actually before we came in. The community colleges in Massachusetts were absolutely critical to this. And it was, I think it was also important for me to learn that when I was making this point to the community college community at the outset, what they felt, what they heard at the outset was that I thought community colleges should be basically voc tech schools. That's not what I think. But I think that community colleges, alongside preparing young people who may not be ready for a 4-year degree to get one, also are uniquely positioned to deal with to address the needs of the transitional worker, people who are, they can't put their lives on hold and be in school all the time, but who need a way to be able to participate in this knowledge economy without the expense of higher ed and the time devoted to it.
But the 4-year degree is expensive, but even tuition here isn't that cheap. Even community college students graduate with student loans. And, that has also been a real drag on the economy. We have a whole generation of college graduates who aren't entering the housing market because they're overburdened by student loans. And we all know buying a house is one of the best things you can do for the economy. What's the path out of that that's sustainable.
So there are two things on the that I would do on the question of student debt today. But then I think we have to be forward-looking as well in terms of how to make community colleges, public colleges, and universities affordable. So let me talk about those separately. Eliminating student debt. The strategies that appeal to me are, number one, refinancing the interest to current rates, which are at or near zero, and doing that retroactively. You apply that to many students, not everybody, but to a lot of students, that wipes it out. For the folks we don't reach, rather than the wealth tax, I would use the non-recurring revenue that comes from the estate tax. Same, different way of harvesting the money, but you're right. We have a whole generation of folks. You know, when I don't want to be one of those guys, but in my day, once upon a time, financial aid, leave aside the question of what tuitions were, but financial aid for those of us who could not go without financial aid was weighted toward grants.
I remember.
Right? And now it's weighted toward loans. The grant has been reduced or vanished. And the loans are managed mainly in the public markets, right, with competitive rates and all that sort of thing, instead of subsidized at the federal level. So we created this.
Right.
We created this. We can fix this. Going forward, I think the high cost of public higher ed, and I wish the president were here to check my facts here, have to do with the fact that we've been draining the public out of public higher ed for a long time. You know, it was 25% of the overall public higher ed budget. I think when I took office, is 10% in South Carolina. I think we made a deal in the recession with the leaders of public higher ed that they would at least freeze tuition and fees if we could get the contribution back up to 50%, and we did. I don't know where that stands today. But you want public higher ed to be affordable, we got to go back to 100%, and we have to sustain it. We have to sustain it. But again, I think education is the single best buck the public spends on our collective future.
Excellent.
The single best buck at all levels.
Well, I'd like to give you a chance to just make your closing argument to the crowd here today, given the circumstances of you entering the race quite late, present you with certain challenges. Obviously, you feel, though, that you still have a compelling case to make for your candidacy, and I'll give you the opportunity to make it right now.
Thank you.
Gathered here today.
Thank you. First of all, again, thanks everybody for coming. Anybody who can stay and have some further conversation, we can talk some more about climate change or what have you. Look, I think we have. I talked earlier about how I think the economic indicators really don't tell the whole story. I think there are lots of people who are feeling stuck or anxious about the future, and I recognize many of those experiences and a lot of those feelings from having grown up on the south side of Chicago. I've had my chance at the American dream, and I think the American dream is worth fighting for. But we're not going to get there by big system changes alone, as important as that is. We also have to have a strategy to grow the economy so that there are more and more opportunities for people to have a place in it when they are ready. And to this point about our experience as a nation historically being pretty good at innovation, we should continue that, but we got to get a lot better with transition. And the way you do that, in my view, is policy making on multiple fronts by investing in education, in innovation, and in infrastructure so that everyone everywhere can participate in this innovation economy. Why do I say that? There are a lot of the candidates, all of us have ideas. I have results. I've delivered on some of these big issues and systems changes. I took office just as the recession was happening, and after 8 years, Massachusetts is #1 in the nation in student achievement and healthcare coverage and entrepreneurial activity, in veteran services, in energy efficiency, and a 25-year employment high. We didn't do that all by ourselves. We did that by collaborating with the business community, with the not-for-profit community, with labor, with a whole host of folks who don't necessarily talk to each other on their own,
Right.
but who will come to the table when the governor or the president asks and collaborate on how to get to those ambitious goals. That's the kind of leader I've been. Whether in the public sector or the private sector, I've been a bridge. And I think bridge building has to be a big part of how we go forward, because along with big systems changes and a fair and just economy, we need a healing in this country. We need a healing. And I think there's a way for us to get there.
Well, good luck bringing that message
Thank
forward.
you very much.
Thank
I
you
appreciate
for your time
you today.
today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Great session.
Thanks everyone for coming.
You're welcome.